Chapter 1 Guts. The world was wrong. Guts knew it before he opened his eye. Dry grass rasped against the plates over his ribs. Heat pressed on the back of his cloak. Dirt gritted between his teeth, bitter with the blood from a bitten cheek. Those things belonged to a world. They had weight, smell, and consequence. What was missing did not. No dead thing whispered beyond the edge of hearing. No cold fingers worried at the brand on the back of his neck. Nothing waited just outside the light for sunset to give it shape. The silence was so complete that for several breaths he mistook it for deafness. Then wind moved through the grass. Somewhere far off, an insect clicked. Guts stayed face down and took stock. His boots were on. Both legs answered, though the left knee protested when he tightened it. The right side of his chest hurt beneath the armor, deep enough to make him measure his next breath. Bruised ribs. Nothing shifted like a brake. His right hand opened and closed. The iron fingers of his left prosthetic scraped through the dirt when he flexed them. The wrist housing moved with a faint grind, but did not catch. His remaining eye opened on a white blur, narrowed against the sun, and found its focus. Alive. He felt no gratitude for it. Gratitude could come later, if later proved worth having. His right hand went over his shoulder. The wrapped grip of the dragon slayer met his palm, and the familiar pull of its mass settled something inside him. Not comfort. The sword had come into his life long after Griffith and Casca, after the band, after the Hill of Swords should have been enough graves for any one man. It had not been with him longest. It had simply survived nearly everything that came after. Guts rolled to one knee and stood. Grass filled the world. It rose yellow-green to his thighs in places, and ran toward every horizon in long, wind-bent waves. There were no mountains, no road, no trees large enough to mark direction. The sky had the hard-faded color of iron left too long in a forge, and the sun hung high enough that east and west were guesses rather than answers. The last place he remembered had smelled of sea salt, leaves, and the strange clean air of Elfhelm. Moonlight had silvered a child's hair. Casca had been alive, awake, herself again. Even if the sight of him still opened wounds, neither of them knew how to close. Shirki, Farnese, Serpico, Isidro, and Puck had all been near. Safe as far as he had known. Then pressure without direction. The sense of the ground dropping out of the world, a blow that had come from everywhere. Now this. Casca. The grass whispered back. He turned slowly, listening past the wind. Shirka. No answer. No small voice correcting him. No Isidro shouting before he had anything useful to say. No wings. No footsteps. No crackle of Puck's complaints. Guts called once more, louder, and heard the name carry until the open land swallowed it. He did not call again. Absence had its own sound. He had learned it young. The old answer to that sound was anger. Anger gave the body something to do when the mind had nowhere useful to go. It tightened the hand, chose a direction, put a face on whatever had been taken. There was no face here. Guts stood in the trampled circle and made himself look at what was true. He had found no blood but his own, no torn cloth, no tracks left by any of the others. If the force that seized him had taken Casca or the rest, it had not dropped them in the same place. If it had left them behind, they were surrounded by mages and warriors on an island built to keep worse things out. He wanted to believe the second possibility. Wanting proved nothing. Neither did imagining the first until it became real enough to fight. He would search. That was a choice he could make without lying to himself. 2 fingers found the brand. The scar was cool and dry. Beneath it, where the talisman should have rested, he found bare skin and the charred end of a cord caught under his collar. Whatever had brought him here had burned the charm away. That should have made the brand louder, not silent. He let his hand fall. Questions did not change the ground under his boots. Movement might. The flattened grass around him formed a rough circle, all of it bent outward from where he had landed. There was no scorched earth, no opening in the air, no track leading in or out. He crouched and pressed his living palm into the soil. The surface was hot and dry. An inch down it held a little coolness, but no seep softened the dirt and no buried spring fed the roots. He checked the rest of his gear before choosing a direction. The berserker armor covered him beneath the cloak, black plates quiet, its collar folded and its hound-shaped helm unformed. The repeater crossbow was still lashed among his gear. Bolt magazines, knives, powder charges, and the small bombs Rickert had built all remained where he expected them, every piece finite and suddenly harder to replace. The cannon inside his left forearm had taken no obvious damage. A pouch near his belt hung lighter than it should have. The small, hard burden that had ridden there for years was gone. Good riddance, if the thing had truly stayed gone. Water mattered more. He drank once from the small skin at his belt, wetting his mouth without satisfying it. The skin was less than half full. No stream cut the plain, but the grass grew thicker in the shallow folds, and small black insects gathered where the soil held moisture. Birds wheeled far to the east. He adjusted his course toward them. As he walked, the land began to show the marks of passage, stalks cropped bluntly by grazing teeth, dung dried hard in the sun. A strip of earth churned by many hooves and then softened by days of wind. Not a road, but close enough. Whoever used it moved with more animals than a village could feed. People meant water, directions, and trouble. The order changed from place to place. The land dipped so slightly to one side that a less practiced eye might have missed it. Guts set off with the slope on his left, keeping the sun over his right shoulder. The dragon slayer rode against his back. Each step pulled at his ribs. He settled into a pace he could hold. Casca rose in his thoughts with the rhythm of walking. Her voice in the Elfhelm garden, rough from years of disuse. Her hand closing around a teacup. The way she had looked through him when memory became pain. He saw the moonlit child turn his face towards the dawn. Guts put the images away. They were safe when he vanished. That was the last thing he knew. And he would not turn ignorance into disaster simply because disaster was familiar. First he would learn where he was. Then he would find what had taken him. Then he would cut a road home if no road existed. The brand stirred before he had walked an hour. It began as an itch beneath the scar. Guts stopped. The warmth sharpened, faded, then returned. It told him something foul was close enough to matter. It did not tell him where, how many, or what shape it wore. He searched the grass with his eye and listened. At first, there was only wind. Then the ground gave a faint, steady tremor beneath his soles. Horses. Many horses. The vibration grew until the grass heads quivered. A dark line appeared along a low rise ahead, broke into separate bodies, and spilled over it. Riders came first by the dozen, Then by the hundred, lean men on compact horses moving with the ease of limbs joined to one body. Behind them, a dust cloud bruised the horizon. More riders moved inside it than Guts cared to count, and behind those came wagons, herds, and a column long enough to lose itself in heat. An army on the move. No, more than an army. An army carried its food until the food ran out. This thing carried children, old people, spare mounts, goats, sheep, hide tents, slaves, and enough loose horses to cover a field. It was a people moving as war moved, stripping the land in front of it and leaving dust behind. Guts had commanded troops and guarded supply lines. He knew the difference between a force that could lose a battle and a force that had made battle its way of living. If the front swallowed him, the riders behind would never know what they had ridden over. Guts stopped in open ground where none of them could mistake him for a man waiting in ambush. His right hand rested near the dragon slayer's grip, but he left the blade on his back. He could kill the first rank. He could kill many after it. If he woke the armor, men on horses would not be the problem. Stopping when there were no enemies left would be. Shirka was not here to reach through the dark and remind him which shape was his. He would not loose the beast for mounted strangers. The leading riders saw him. Their line changed without a shouted order, half flowing past while a score curved inward. They circled at a distance, bells chiming in long black braids. Sun-dark skin, painted leather, horsehair leggings, curved swords. Short bows hung within easy reach of nearly every saddle. They spoke to one another in a language Guts had never heard. One called something toward him. Laughter answered. His size interested them. The sword interested them more. One rider leaned sideways in the saddle and mimed dragging an impossible weight. Another pretended to topple from his horse. The circle filled with bells and teeth. Guts watched their hands. Mockery was wind. Hands killed. The first rider came close enough for Guts to smell horse sweat and the sour milk on the man's breath. He swept past with a rawhide whip, snapping it beside Guts's head. The lash cracked like a split branch. Guts did not blink. The rider wheeled away, grinning. A second man approached from Guts's right, where the missing eye left the world narrower. His horse's hoofbeats changed at the last instant. Metal hissed free. That was enough. Guts pivoted toward the sound as the curved blade came for his neck. His right hand tore the dragon slayer from its back brace. The iron slab traveled low, both hands finding the grip, and met the charging horse across the front of the chest. There was no clean sword sound. There was a wet concussion. The edge broke the breastbone, drove through the heart and near lung, and carried a red fan of ribs out through the animal's left side. One foreleg folded beneath a body that was still moving at full speed. The horse struck the ground shoulder first, its neck bending under 1,000 pounds of flesh and momentum. Bone burst through hide. The rider left the saddle and turned once in the air before landing on his head. His skull opened in the grass with a noise smaller than the horse's death and more final. The laughter ended. Blood smoked on the dragon slayer's dark surface. Guts brought it around and set his feet. The ruined horse kicked twice, spraying the stalks black-red, then lay still. The riders' faces changed, not to fear. They were too used to death for that. The amusement went out of them, and what remained was pride with nowhere to go except forward. 3 attacked together. One loosed an arrow while the other 2 crossed their charges, forcing Guts to choose a line. He raised the broad blade. The arrow shattered against it. He let the impact of the first rider's arak scrape along the flat, turned his wrists, and drove the sword's point into the earth. The dragon slayer became a wall. The second horse tried to pass the other side and found 4 feet of iron where open grass had been. Its shoulder struck the flat. The collision stopped the animal's front half and threw its hindquarters sideways. Horse and rider went down together. The man's leg vanished beneath the rolling body. His scream rose thin and high until the horse's weight crushed the breath out of him. The impact drove Guts back half a step. His boots tore twin furrows through the soil, and pain flared beneath his right ribs. The planted sword held. The first rider was already turning for another pass. Guts ripped the sword free and advanced instead of waiting. Surprise widened the man's eyes. Men carrying smaller weapons were supposed to retreat from horses. Men carrying weapons like Dragon Slayer were not supposed to move that quickly. Guts swung from the hip. The blade caught rider and saddle together. Leather, pelvis, and spine failed in the same instant. The upper body spun away, trailing loops of intestine. The lower stayed twisted in the saddle leathers, while the terrified horse ran on beneath it. Hot blood struck Guts across the chest and jaw. The third rider had already fitted another arrow. Guts turned his left side toward the shot and raised the sword. The man did not fire. He shouted back toward the head of the column instead, a hard-repeated call that passed through the horsemen. The circle opened. 3 riders came through it at a walk. They were older than the men Guts had killed. Their braids hung with heavier bells. Their horses held so lightly that reins seemed unnecessary. They spread as they approached, never crossing one another's path. Their faces carried no mockery. Each kept himself between Guts and a fourth man still farther back. Not guards hired for coin. Men tied to one life. The brand gave another pulse. Warmer now, but still weaker than the pain an apostle brought. Whatever had stirred it had drawn closer with the column, or followed behind it. These men were only men. The first oathman drew Guts's attention with a high charge and a raised arak. The second came low from the blind side. The third hung back with a short bow, waiting for Guts to commit. Better. Guts took 2 fast steps toward the first horse, forcing the rider to shorten his stroke. The arak rang against the dragon slayer. Guts rolled the impact down the slab, turned under it, and rammed his iron forearm into the man's sword wrist. The grip broke with a dull series of cracks. Before the rider could pull free, Guts released the sword with his prosthetic hand and held the trapped arm. His right hand carried the dragon slayer through a short upward cut. The oathman's ribs caved inward. One broken end punched through his back. The rest drove through lung and heart. Guts let the body fall beneath its own horse. The bowstring snapped from his right. He caught the sound, not the arrow. The shaft grazed his cheek and punched through the edge of his cloak before glancing off the armor's shoulder plate. The sting drew his head around. The archer was already reaching for a second shot. Guts wrenched the arak from the first man's broken grip and hurled it. It struck the bowman across the face, not hard enough to kill, hard enough to blind him with another man's blood. The lowrider came in then. Arak angled for the gap beneath Guts's right arm. Guts shifted half a step. The point scored black armor instead of flesh. He brought Dragon Slayer down behind the rider. The blade hit the horse across the hips. Its pelvis collapsed. The hind legs folded forward under the belly, and the iron continued through saddle and rider before striking earth. What fell on either side no longer resembled matching parts. The bowman wiped blood from his eyes and saw Guts looking at him. He lowered the bow. For a moment, Guts thought the man had understood. Then the riders around them went silent enough that he heard a new set of bells. The fourth man came forward. He was not as tall as Guts, but few men were. He was broad through the shoulders and bare above the waist, his copper skin marked by old cuts that had healed without diminishing him. His black braid hung past his belt, heavy with bells. None of it had ever been cut. Guts did not know the custom, but he knew what an unbroken record looked like when a warrior wore one. The horsemen moved aside before the man signaled them. Their leader, then. A young woman rode several lengths behind him on a silver mare. Her hair shone pale as forged silver in the sun. One hand rested low on the swell of her belly. A square-built man in foreign mail kept beside her, watching Guts with a soldier's attention. More riders guarded her flanks. Beyond them were captives on foot, women and children, and the scorched remnants of a raid moving with the column. The leader looked once at the dead men, once at the horses, then he looked at Guts. No grief showed, no anger either, only an appraisal so direct that it required no shared language. Guts had seen the same look across dueling grounds, battle lines, and tavern floors just before someone decided whether a question would be asked with steel. The man drew his curved sword. Behind him, the silver-haired woman called out. The word meant nothing to Guts. The warning in it did. The leader did not turn. He raised his blade, touched his heels to the horse, and came on. No circling, no show. The animal leapt from a walk into a charge, powerful and fast, while its rider lowered his body beside the neck. His curved blade began its arc early, timed to take Guts across the throat as the horse passed. Guts stepped toward him. The riders shouted. To them, it must have looked like a man choosing to be trampled. Guts was choosing the only patch of ground from which the dragon slayer could finish its work. He planted his right foot outside the horse's line and swung up from low left. The dragon slayer struck where neck, chest, and shoulder met. Its edge split the heavy muscle, but mass did the killing. The blow shattered the left shoulder blade and drove fragments through the chest. The forelegs ceased to support anything. The horse collapsed into its own speed, head and ruined front quarter diving, while the rest of the body tried to continue. Guts turned his hips and let the fall pass across his front instead of through him. The leader's arak still found him. Its point scraped over the right pauldron and tore a line through the cloak, the force numbing Guts's living shoulder. Then the horse struck earth. Its body rotated, flinging its rider clear. The dragon slayer's follow-through had spent most of itself on the animal, but not all. The last span of iron caught the rider at the right shoulder. The joint burst. Collarbone, shoulder blade, and the head of the upper arm became red fragments inside torn flesh. The arm stayed attached by strips of muscle and skin, dragging uselessly as the man hit the ground and rolled. Blood pulsed from the hollow beneath it in heavy, shortening streams. Guts recovered the blade and faced him. The man pushed to one knee with his left hand. That effort told Guts more than the long braid had. A lesser man would have spent his last moments staring at what was gone. This one looked at the sword, then at the stranger holding it, and tried to stand because standing was what remained. His leg failed. He did not lower his head. The silver-haired woman was off her mare before the mailed man could stop her. Pregnancy made the dismount awkward, but she struck the ground running. Her guards followed. She fell to her knees beside the dying man and caught his face between hands already slick with his blood. She spoke to him in the rider's tongue. Her voice broke on the first words and steadied on the next. The dying man's gaze left Guts. It found her, and some of the hardness in it changed. He said one word, her name perhaps. She bent until her forehead touched his, blood on a pregnant woman's hands. For an instant, the grass was gone. There was only a black sky, a body held out of reach, and his own arm trapped between teeth while something precious screamed. Guts shut the door on the memory. When the dying man exhaled again, he did not draw another breath. The woman stayed bent over him. The sound that moved through the riders was not a cry at first. It was the absence of one, the sudden inward pull of thousands of people, understanding that the center of their world had stopped. Then voices broke across the column. Men shouted names. Horses turned. Orders met other orders, and neither yielded. The surviving oath man dropped his bow. He drew his arak and charged with a scream that tore his throat raw. Guts moved before the woman's guards could. He stepped between her and the rider, lifted Dragonslayer in both hands, and cut level through horse and man. The blade entered beneath the horse's jaw, broke the neck, passed through the rider's thigh and saddle, and threw both bodies sideways. The oathman hit the ground, still trying to crawl. Guts ended it with a downward stroke that crushed his skull into the soil. 3 oathmen, 3 dead. No one else came. The mailed foreigner had his longsword out. He placed himself between Guts and the woman, but the point stayed low. He had understood what the last charge was and who Guts had kept it from reaching. His face held no thanks. Suspicion was the wiser choice. Guts agreed with him. The woman raised her head. Violet eyes found Guts over the dead man's body. Tears streaked dust on her cheeks, but grief had not emptied her. It had sharpened her into something dangerous. One of her young riders spoke to her urgently. Another pointed toward the long column, where men were already peeling away behind different leaders. The woman answered without looking from Guts. Her voice shook once. She forced it still and gave 3 short commands. The young men moved at once, one to her mare, one toward the captives, one to the riders nearest the dead call. Grief could wait, she had decided. Survival would not. Guts knew something about that choice. You killed Khal Drogo. Guts understood the common tongue, though her accent placed every word with care. He looked at the dead leader. A Khal then. He charged, her mouth tightened. He was my husband. Guts had no answer that would make the field different. He rested Dragonslayer against his shoulder and turned away. Who are you? She called after him. He stopped for half a breath. Trying to get home. Then he walked. Behind him, the Khalasar began to split along lines that had existed before any sword found them. Men with authority called riders to their own bells. Herds were turned. Wagons changed direction. Groups that had moved as one body moments earlier drew apart and watched one another across widening lanes of trampled grass. Some looked toward the dead call. More looked toward the horses they meant to keep. The silver-haired woman shouted commands in their tongue. A smaller knot gathered around her. The mailed man, her young riders, handmaids, captives who had nowhere safer to stand. She was trying to hold the nearest pieces together while the larger thing tore itself apart. She had almost nothing to hold it with. The dead man's strength had been the law here. Guts could read that much without knowing a word of their language. Now every rider who commanded 10 others was measuring whether he might command 100 by sunset. Two groups collided near a herd of red mares. Iraqs came out. A man fell, and the fighting spread until an older rider forced his horse between the factions and bellowed them apart. Not peace, delay. Farther down the column, a wagon tipped as its driver tried to turn across the flow. A wheel broke. People scattered while horses screamed in their traces. Captives began slipping into the tall grass, some alone, some dragging children by the hand. Mounted men noticed and let them go. Human lives had become the cheapest property on the field. The woman saw that too. She pointed, and two of her young riders gathered the fleeing captives toward her instead of driving them back to the larger column. The mailed man said something sharp to her in the common tongue. Guts caught only the end. "Cannot keep them all." "Then we keep those we can," she answered. There was no softness in it, only refusal. One of the would-be leaders rode near the dead cow, looked down, and spat into the grass. He called to the riders behind him and wheeled east with perhaps 1,000 at his back. Another stream broke west. A third remained where it was, waiting to see which direction promised the most horses and the least resistance. The woman's knot looked very small between them. Guts knew the work. He had watched armies die before the men inside them did. He had gone perhaps 50 paces when the brand pulsed again. This time heat stabbed beneath the scar. He stopped. A wet line crept under his collar. The blood and death had made the warning harder to read, not clearer. The brand told him only that the thing from his world was close. His eye and ears had to do the rest. Wind bent the grass east. 30 paces south of the dead call, a narrow wake moved west. Against the wind. The horses nearest it began to shy. One screamed and tore free of its handler. Guts smelled something beneath the horse blood. Old meat, damp earth, and the sweet rot of a grave opened in summer. The wake changed course, not toward him, toward the silver-haired woman. Guts turned back. The mailed man saw him coming and raised his longsword. The woman stood behind him with one bloody hand on her belly and the other clenched at her side. Her guards drew curved blades. None of them had seen the grass. "Stay back," the foreigner said. Guts kept walking. "I said, stay back." "Not you." Guts passed his gaze over the man's shoulder. The wake had stopped. The grass there trembled without bending. The woman followed his eye. "What is it?" The brand burned hotter. Another thread of blood slipped down his back. Guts lowered the dragon slayer from his shoulder and wrapped both hands around the grip. Something hungry. Behind her, the grass opened.